At 4:59 a.m., on the 4th of March 2026, the surface of the Indian Ocean was black as tar and terrifyingly still. Exactly 40 nautical miles off the southern coast of Sri Lanka, the Iranian frigate Iris Dina was silently cutting through the waves in the darkness. A 1,000-ton mass of steel moved forward in silence, carrying with it the pride of Gulf naval power. On deck, 180 sailors were resting, completely unaware that they were counting down the final seconds of their lives. They had just completed a multinational naval exercise in India and were returning home full of confidence. A false sense of peace hung over the ship, a blind feeling of safety born from a system that always claimed to be unbeatable. But directly beneath them, deep in the cold heart of the ocean, a true American monster was awakening. It was a U.S. Navy Virginia-class fast attack submarine, the quietest and most ruthless hunter on the planet. No radar warning, no alarm siren. The defensive systems of Iris Dina were completely blind at that moment. The frigate's thick steel hull could not conceal the mechanical noise coming from its spinning propeller system. Far below, the Virginia-class submarine did not need to emit a single signal to expose its position. It simply listened and watched in silence. It was using an advanced passive sonar system, an electronic brain designed for one purpose only: listening to every vibration in the ocean. Goodbye. Quantum computers mapped the seabed, searched for mines, and analyzed every microscopic mechanical pulse coming from the opposing vessel. Sonar arrays mounted along the hull, combined with the towed array trailing behind the stern, collected enormous volumes of acoustic data about the target. The Americans did not need to see the Iranians with their eyes. They only needed to hear the mechanical breathing of that massive warship. This moment marked a brutal milestone in naval history, a blood-soaked message sent from the bottom of the sea. For the first time since World War II, an American submarine sank an enemy warship with a single torpedo. No giant fleet, no loud air campaign, just one invisible assassin was enough to finish the job. That assassin was called the Mark 48, a heavyweight torpedo capable of breaking the spine of any warship in the world. Inside the suffocating red-lit control room of the Virginia-class submarine, the captain coldly gave the order to fire. The Mark 48 heavy torpedo left its tube. It did not rush forward chaotically, it was a machine that seemed to think. The 3,000-pound metal beast tore through the black water at more than 50 knots, heading straight for the stern of Iris Dina. Its sophisticated piston engine, powered by compressed gas, propelled it forward, leaving behind a thin data cable. That cable was the reins of death, constantly feeding coordinates and adjusting the torpedo's trajectory in real time. The 1-2-kilometer distance was vanishing in an instant. Iris Dina still had no idea that the scythe was closing in. When the Mark 48 reached close combat range, the guidance wire was automatically severed to free it completely. Immediately, the active sonar system in its warhead opened its eyes, locking onto the weakest point of the prey. There was no longer any chance of escape. Its onboard intelligence would pursue the target even if the ship changed course. At exactly 5 a.m., the torpedo slammed into the stern of Iris Dina, where the ship's most critical propulsion systems were located. The force of 1,200 pounds of TNT detonated, creating a massive wall of water pressure that smashed back into the hull. This was not an ordinary explosion, but an act of extreme physical destruction that turned solid steel into fragments. In a fraction of a microsecond, the entire propulsion system of the 1,000-ton ship was vaporized beneath the sea. The shockwave tore apart the aft deck, unleashing a roar that shook the ocean floor and split the ship in half instantly. Infrared footage later declassified by the Pentagon allegedly showed the absurd power of the blast lifting the ship's stern clear out of the water. Gravity then dragged the 1,000-ton steel mass back down, as seawater rushed through gigantic ruptures in the hull. The steel structure completely failed, and the huge vessel began to sink catastrophically, with the stern being swallowed first. The countdown for the remaining sailors began, plunging them into total panic in the freezing water. Exactly 8 minutes after that infernal moment, the shattered communication system sent out one final desperate distress signal. The Sri Lankan Navy urgently dispatched warships and aircraft to the coordinates, but the ocean had already fallen silent again. By the time rescuers arrived, the proud steel giant named Iris Dina had vanished completely into the deep. There was no ship left to save, only black oil slicks and a few lifeboats drifting in the waves. Of the 180 people who had set out, only 32 sailors were supposedly pulled from the sea, while more than 80 lives were lost forever. A cold statistic in a classified file, proof of the brutality of undersea warfare. Why did the US Navy strike with such ruthless decisiveness against a ship that was merely on its way home? The sinking of Iris Dina was, in reality, only the visible tip of a vast geopolitical iceberg. The U.S. Central Command had reportedly been quietly monitoring every movement of every vessel flying the Iranian flag. Those ships were not simply means of transportation, they were mobile launch platforms of death. They posed a direct threat to the American empire and to some of its most important military bases in the Indian Ocean. The ultimate target Iran was allegedly aiming at was Diego Garcia, the military Achilles heel of the United States. An isolated fortress island, yet one that plays a vital role in controlling the entire Middle East. Diego Garcia is home to the ghostly B-2 Spirit bombers, a forward stronghold the Americans consider untouchable. The United States has always taken pride in geographical distance, a natural wall that shields it from attack. But arrogance always comes at a price, and Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy had begun to see cracks in that system. Iran did not possess giant supercarriers for head-on confrontation, so it designed an asymmetric strategy instead. Its goal was not occupation, but paralysis, crippling American air power before Washington could respond. Iran's ballistic missile program was the spearhead forged in the darkness of underground bunkers. The IMAD medium-range missile, with a 2,000-kilometer range, was said to be capable of tearing across the sky and threatening a vast area. Even more dangerous was the Sumer 1,500 cruise missile, a cunning design inherited from Russian military technology. It did not follow a predictable parabolic trajectory, but carried electronic decoys to deceive radar. Its warhead could allegedly shift course automatically and skim at low altitude, slipping through Patriot air defenses. However, fixed launchers on land were far too vulnerable to satellite detection and preemptive destruction. To solve that weakness, Iran reportedly activated a second layer of camouflage through a brutal proxy war network. Houthi rebels and militias in Iraq began firing, creating a massive diversionary attack. Missiles and suicide drones were launched toward Saudi military bases to draw the world's attention elsewhere. American forces were forced to spread their interception assets thin, while radar networks became overloaded with false signals. Attention was pulled away from the heart of the ocean, and that was when the real monster emerged from the shadows. In February 2026, a cargo ship quietly crossed the Indian Ocean under an innocuous civilian-sounding name, Shahid Madavi. Originally, the container ship Sarvan, 240 meters long, it had no exposed machine guns and no intimidating military radar. Its AIS maritime tracking system presented it as nothing more than a harmless merchant vessel following a normal route. But beneath that rusting civilian shell was a floating military base, with sealed containers hiding a deadly secret. Stealth ballistic missile launchers with a 2,500-kilometer range were allegedly waiting for final orders from Tehran. By placing a civilian-appearing vessel in the middle of the ocean, Iran had supposedly put Diego Garcia directly in the center of a mobile crosshair. Its strategy was not based on perfect accuracy, but on the mathematics of quantity and overwhelming saturation. The Hudson Institute reportedly published a chilling worst-case analysis of what could happen if defenses were overwhelmed. It would not take a rain of missiles, only 5 warheads getting through the shield would be enough to turn Diego Garcia into ashes. A swarm of modified Fateh 110 missiles, adapted for launch from unstable sea-based platforms, would carry cluster munitions. Their casings would open in the air, scattering tens of thousands of razor-sharp fragments. If just 5 warheads penetrated, the entire fleet of B-2 bombers parked in the open could be destroyed. The airbase would be crippled, ammunition depots would erupt in chain explosions, and the fortress would become a smoking ruin. That, according to the narrative, was why the Pentagon could not afford to wait. A comprehensive kill order had been given. Any vessel belonging to the IRGC that appeared on radar was treated as a target that had to disappear. No warning, no negotiation. A slaughter at sea paved the way through the logic of killing algorithms. 20 Iranian warships were reportedly blacklisted, led by the pride of Iran's technology, the Soleimani class. This was a high-speed catamaran warship, a modern war machine armed to the teeth. But the Soleimani design supposedly contained a fatal physical flaw rooted in its very construction for speed. When one such escort ship operated near Bandar Abbas, American firepower came down without warning. To slice through the wind across the surface of the water, its hull had not been made from traditional solid high-strength steel. Instead, Iranian engineers had used ultralight aluminum alloy for the hull, and that became its death sentence. When struck by missiles, aluminum would not merely crack like steel, it would ignite violently under extreme heat. Temperatures of thousands of degrees turned the entire ship into a giant crematorium at sea, impossible to extinguish. Its collapse came so fast that Iran's naval hopes became nothing more than drifting ashes on the water. Before being reduced to cinders, the Soleimani class had been a frightening miniature fortress, with shallow draft and excellent maneuverability. It carried 6 anti-ship cruise missiles, including 4 long-range Nor missiles capable of sinking transport vessels. Even more ominously, it was Iran's first warship equipped with a hidden vertical launch system, VLS, behind the command tower. That VLS contained 6 land attack missile tubes and 16 surface-to-air launch cells, ready to fire within seconds. The ship also had a landing deck for a Bell 412 helicopter, used for anti-submarine and rescue missions. It was capable of launching swarms of Shahed suicide drones to overload enemy defenses. Below deck, hydraulic cranes could release explosive-laden speedboats in moments. Yet all of that advanced technology evaporated after a single barrage. The hunter officially became the prey. The U.S. Navy had demonstrated that ultralight aluminum was a fatal mistake in a real firefight. And America's violent display of power did not stop with the easily burning aluminum escort ships. Attention now returned to the giant converted machine moving silently through the Gulf of Oman. The Shahid Mahdavi, a 240-meter steel container vessel, had by then revealed itself as a ruthless mothership. Iranian engineers had allegedly carried out a crude but lethal mechanical conversion, turning the deck into a massive landing area. That deck was not just for light helicopters, it had been reinforced to bear the weight of powerful Sea King helicopters. This was a grim historical irony, because those Sea Kings had once been prized American military assets. The United States had sold them to Iran during the Shah era, and now it was being forced to face the blades it once forged. Once symbols of cooperation, the Sea Kings aboard Mahdavi were now supposedly ready to carry suicide teams to seize oil tankers. In the ship's lower bays, hydraulic systems roared as they released 4 explosive speedboats. Waves of suicide drones began taking off from launchers hidden inside shipping containers. 2 heavy guns were welded onto the bow and stern, creating short-range firepower strong enough to threaten nearby targets. A vertical launch system had been embedded directly into the superstructure of the rusty cargo ship. Simply by converting a civilian vessel, Iran had created a potentially existential threat to American carrier strike groups. But the Americans were not unfamiliar with this style of warfare. They had bloody historical files to draw from. The Pentagon reportedly did not hesitate to repeat a campaign of total destruction in order to reassert command over the sea. The next recorded victim was said to be the Joshan, an armored Iranian fast attack craft swollen with pride. At full speed, Joshan charged directly toward an American surface action group in open provocation. Immediately, a harpoon missile was launched from the Iranian side, ripping through the sky toward the USS Wainwright. The harpoon itself was another bitter irony, an American-made missile, a leftover from arms sales before the revolution. The cruiser USS Wainwright instantly recognized the offspring, now rushing toward it at terrifying speed. Instead of panicking, Wainwright's electronic defense system launched chaff decoys. A huge electromagnetic cloud filled the air, temporarily blinding the harpoon and sending it crashing into the sea. Without giving Iran time to reload, a barrage of standard missiles roared back toward the target. Joshan was torn into pieces in what the narration describes as the first anti-ship missile duel in history. The destruction was so fast that Iran reportedly did not even understand what had happened. Next came the frigate Sahand. Instead of retreating after seeing its companion annihilated, it moved out to challenge the United States. Sahand frantically fired missiles at reconnaissance aircraft flying nearby to assert its presence. The retaliation came instantly through coordinated strikes by A-6 intruder attack aircraft and the destroyer Strauss. A storm of missiles and armor-piercing bombs rained down on the deck, turning the proud steel hull into torn open metal. The steel burned furiously, and the ammunition stored aboard began exploding, creating columns of flame tens of meters high. Sahand was completely deformed, becoming a giant floating torch before finally sinking from catastrophic damage. But the peak of modern war's physical absurdity lay in the story of the frigate Submarine. Hours after Sahand sank, Submarine tried its luck by locking onto an American jet. Its air defense system launched a surface-to-air missile, but its opponent was a highly experienced pilot. The American pilot made a brutal high-G turn and narrowly dodged the missile in a spectacular maneuver. Instead of fleeing, the jet circled back, climbed, and locked onto the target with a precise laser guidance system. The pilot dropped a 500-pound guided bomb, but its target was not the deck. Its fall path was so eerily perfect that the bomb went straight into the ship's exhaust funnel. It plunged into the engine room deep below and detonated, trapping the blast pressure inside the steel hull. The resulting internal explosion supposedly tore apart Submarine's backbone and its most critical systems. The ship was crippled by a tiny physical vulnerability that its designers had never imagined. All of these bloody slaughters, all of these invisible torpedoes, served a single supreme American purpose: to impose absolute domination over the narrowest yet most strategically important maritime choke point on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz, a deathly strip of water only 21 miles wide, carries the heartbeat of the global economy. It is the main artery pumping 30% of the world's oil each day, where every mistake can trigger collapse. Even a small disruption there can send energy prices soaring and push nations into crisis. The deepest irony is that America must spend trillions on nuclear submarines and quantum radar systems, all to protect a narrow waterway from rusting converted cargo ships. A colossal war machine is now engaged in an arms race against the ghosts of its own past. The American system does not collapse because its enemies are too strong, but because it exhausts itself under the weight of its own arrogance. The empire believes it can control the oceanic whirlwind with nothing but a high-tech steel vise. But at Hormuz, even a cheap naval mine can shatter the illusion of invincibility. Returning to the wreck of Irastina, its disappearance stands as the harshest warning to anyone who dares challenge that order. The Mark 48 is not merely a torpedo, it is a message about America's invisible presence beneath the waves. When a 1,000-ton ship is lifted and broken in half, that is no longer war, it is a performance of power. Every Iranian effort to disguise cargo vessels as warships becomes meaningless before passive sonar systems. Acoustic data never lies. Every propeller, every engine has its own unique sound fingerprint. No matter how many missile containers Shahid Mahdavi carries, the sound of its rusting engines will always betray it. The Americans have built a global listening network through which no vibration can escape detection. The contest between Virginia-class submarines and the IRGC fleet is proof of a terrifying technological imbalance. One side relies on absolute stealth, the other relies on audacity and surprise attacks from the dark. But on the open sea, recklessness often leads to the highest casualty figures of all. 80 sailors aboard Denna never lived to see the sunlight of March 5 that year. They died because of a security gap their leaders had chosen to ignore in exchange for displays of strength. Iran wanted to turn the Indian Ocean into its own playground, but forgot that beneath the surface lay someone else's domain. The appearance of vertical launch systems on Iranian ships was a step forward, but defense remains the true key. If a navy cannot intercept a Mark 48 racing in at 50 knots, all offensive weapons become meaningless. The tragedy of Submarine, with a bomb falling directly into its smokestack, is perhaps the most expensive lesson in military design. A tiny overlooked detail can destroy a machine worth hundreds of millions of dollars in seconds. Modern war is no longer a contest between giants, it is a hunt for flaws in the system. Whoever finds the vulnerability first holds the power of life and death without expending too many resources. The United States chose the harshest possible way to seal those vulnerabilities, by erasing every emerging threat. 20 Iranian warships in flames became the price of maintaining the fragile stability of the world's oil lifeline. But can brute force sustain itself forever when challengers are becoming increasingly sophisticated? Ghost ships, cruise missiles hiding under civilian cover, these specters will continue to appear. The struggle at the Strait of Hormuz will never truly end as long as oil remains the blood of civilization. Every time an American ship departs Diego Garcia, thousands of defensive links tighten in tension. The calm of the Indian Ocean is only a flat surface, hiding the undercurrents of destruction below. The scenario of a swarm attack on the B-2 base remains the worst nightmare of American generals. They know that one moment of carelessness could bring down their supposedly invincible fortress by the hand of a David armed with missiles. That is why Virginia-class killers will continue lurking in the deep, cold, and emotionless like machines. They are the final barrier, preventing a wider war that could drag the global economy into darkness. Looking back at history, defections and ingenious plots always begin with understanding how a system works. Iran had figured out the overstretched nature of American force deployment, but America had figured out the heartbeat of Iranian ships. This is a contest of the sharpest minds, where the smallest mistake is paid for in blood and steel. The fate of Iris Dina is the end of military innocence, a reminder of brutal reality. There is no glory in sinking into the abyss before even seeing the face of the one who struck you. There is only the coldness of the ocean, and secrets buried forever with the rusting wreck. The American system won this round, but the geopolitical game still has pieces yet to be turned over. Empty moral lessons have no place here. Only the logic of weapons and the power of invisibility matter. The final irony is that even the victor lives in fear of a vulnerability not yet discovered. The truth is that both sides are imprisoned by the very advanced weapons they created. The distance between a hero and a pile of scrap metal can be nothing more than a single active sonar pulse. Look at what has happened in the Strait of Hormuz and see how fragile the world truly is. Power does not lie in the size of the ship, but in the ability to disappear completely before the enemy's eyes. Thank you for joining Loom on this journey through the darkest files of military history. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next stories of scams and criminal masterminds. This world still has many loopholes waiting to be uncovered and many truths that have never been revealed. Next week, we will examine another shocking case about a man who single-handedly deceived the entire banking system. I am Loom, and these are the coldest truths behind humanity's most resounding victories.